The rain hammered the roof of the foster home, a relentless drumbeat that mirrored the chaos in Jamal's heart. At 16, he'd learned to pack light both his belongings and his expectations. Tonight, he sat on the edge of his cot, clutching a tattered journal, wondering if this would be another house that spit him out like a bad taste. Jamal had been in foster care since he was 8, bounced between homes in upstate New York like a pinball. He was a black kid with a quick smile but guarded eyes, carrying the weight of being different in ways that made adults uncomfortable. At 14, he'd come out as gay to a foster family who'd promptly called the caseworker to return him, as if he were a defective product. Since then, he'd kept his truth buried, scribbling his feelings in the journal he now held, its pages filled with dreams of a family who might see him for who he was. The door creaked open, and his caseworker, Ms. Carter, stepped in, her face softer than usual. "Jamal, pack up. You're meeting your new foster parents tonight." Her voice held a cautious optimism, but Jamal had heard it before. He stuffed his journal into his backpack, steeling himself for another temporary stop. An hour later, he stood in the living room of a modest house in Rochester, its walls lined with photos of smiling faces. The air smelled of fresh coffee and lavender. Claire and David Thompson, a white couple in their mid-40s, greeted him with nervous smiles. Claire, with her warm brown eyes and a cardigan that looked softer than anything Jamal had ever owned, extended her hand. "We're so happy you're here," she said, her voice trembling with sincerity. David, a lanky man with glasses and a salt and pepper beard, nodded, his hands fidgeting as if he wasn't sure whether to shake Jamal's hand or hug him. Jamal offered a tight smile, his defenses up. He'd seen this before, well-meaning couples who thought they could save him, only to flinch when they learned who he really was. But something about Claire's gaze, steady and kind, made him pause. Maybe it was the way she didn't rush to fill the silence, or how David's awkward chuckle felt genuine, not forced. That night, they showed him to a small bedroom with a twin bed, a desk, and a window overlooking a backyard lined with sunflowers. "We thought you might like to paint the walls," Claire said, pointing to a can of blue paint in the corner. "Make it your own." Jamal nodded, unsure how to process the idea of his own anything. He lay awake that night, the journal open on his chest, writing, "Is this a trick? Or could this be home?" Over the next few weeks, Jamal tested the waters. He kept to himself, watching Claire and David for signs of the inevitable rejection. But they surprised him. Claire asked about his favorite music, Kendrick Lamar and Billie Eilish. He admitted, and soon her old stereo was blasting his playlists. David, a high school history teacher, invited him to trivia nights at the local library, laughing when Jamal outsmarted him on pop culture questions. They didn't pry, didn't push, but their small gestures, leaving snacks on his desk, asking his opinion on dinner, chipped away at his walls. One evening, as they sat around the kitchen table eating Claire's slightly burned lasagna, David mentioned a family camping trip they took every summer. "We'd love for you to come," he said, his eyes hopeful. Jamal froze, fork halfway to his mouth. Family. The word felt foreign, like a language he'd forgotten how to speak. "I'll think about it," he mumbled. But inside, his heart raced. He wanted to believe them, but trust was a muscle he hadn't used in years. That night, he wrote in his journal, "They're trying. But what happens when they find out I'm gay?" The question lingered as the weeks turned into months. Jamal started to notice things about the Thompsons that made him feel safe. Claire's quiet strength, the way she listened without judgment. David's goofy dad jokes, delivered with a sincerity that made Jamal laugh despite himself. But there was something else, a shadow in David's eyes, a cough that lingered too long. Jamal overheard Claire on the phone one night. Her voice low and strained. The doctor said it's spreading faster than they thought. Jamal's stomach dropped. He didn't know what was wrong, but he knew that tone fear wrapped in forced calm. He'd heard it from foster parents before, usually right before they gave up on him. But this time, it wasn't about him. It was about David. The next morning, Jamal found Claire in the kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold. "Is David okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire's eyes glistened, but she forced a smile. "He's fighting, Jamal. He's strong. But it's cancer. Stage 4. The word hit like a punch. Jamal didn't know what to say, so he didn't. Instead, he sat beside her, the silence heavy but not uncomfortable. For the first time, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself, a family. Fragile and flawed, but real. That night, he opened his journal and wrote, "David's dying. I don't know how to help, but I want to." Jamal couldn't shake the image of David's tired smile, the way it flickered like a candle in a storm. He'd seen loss before, foster siblings who vanished, caseworkers who moved on, but this was different. David wasn't just another face. He was the man who'd spent hours teaching Jamal how to grill burgers, laughing when they both burned the buns. The Thompsons' house, once a place of tentative hope, now carried a quiet tension. Claire moved through her days with forced cheer, her laughter a little too bright, her hugs a little too tight. Jamal noticed the pill bottles on the kitchen counter, the hospital appointment reminders pinned to the fridge. He wanted to ask more, but fear held him back. What if knowing made it real? One afternoon, while David napped upstairs, Jamal found Claire in the backyard, pulling weeds with a ferocity that didn't match her gentle hands. "You okay?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She paused, dirt smudged on her cheek, and sighed. "I'm scared, Jamal. David's chemo isn't working like we hoped. We're running out of time." The words settled like stones in Jamal's chest. He didn't know how to comfort her, but he grabbed a trowel and started digging, the rhythm of the work a silent promise to stay. They worked side by side until the sun dipped low, and Claire finally spoke again. "He's always wanted to do something big. You know, something that matters." But now, her voice broke, and Jamal felt a pang of guilt for all the times he'd doubted their kindness. That night, he overheard David and Claire talking in hushed tones. David's voice was weak but firm. "I want to make the most of what's left, Claire. For us. For Jamal." The words sparked something in Jamal, a need to do something. Anything. To ease their pain. He opened his journal and wrote, "David wants to matter. Maybe I can help him." The next day, Jamal found David in the living room, flipping through an old photo album. "You like history, right?" Jamal asked, sitting beside him. David's eyes lit up, the fatigue momentarily fading. "Love it. Always wanted to write a book about the people history forgets, ordinary folks who changed things in small ways." Jamal leaned closer, studying the photos, black and white images of civil rights marches, grainy shots of community organizers. "Why didn't you?" he asked. David coughed, then smiled wryly. "Life got in the way. Teaching. Bills. Now this." He gestured vaguely at his body, as if cancer were just an inconvenience. An idea flickered in Jamal's mind. Fragile but bright. What if we did it together? Your stories. My words. I'm pretty good with a pen. He held up his journal, half joking. But David's face softened with something like pride. "You'd do that with me?" he asked. Jamal nodded, his throat tight. For the first time, he felt like he had a purpose beyond surviving. Over the next few weeks, they started working. David shared stories he'd collected over years, tales of unsung heroes, like the black seamstress who organized voter drives in the 1960s, or the gay couple who ran a safe house for runaways in the 80s. Jamal took notes, his handwriting sprawling across pages, turning David's memories into vivid prose. Claire noticed the change in both of them. David's coughs didn't stop, but his laughter came easier. Jamal, usually so guarded, started talking more, sharing bits of his own story, his love of poetry, his fear of being rejected again. One evening, as they worked, David paused and looked at Jamal. "Your family. You know that, right?" Jamal froze. He wanted to believe it, but the fear lingered. What if they found out he was gay? Would they still call him family? He nodded. But his journal that night held the truth. "I want to tell them, but I'm scared they'll stop loving me." As spring turned to summer, David's health worsened. He spent more days in bed, his voice weaker, but he never stopped talking about the book. Jamal kept writing, pouring his heart into every word, determined to make David's dream real. He started researching online, digging into archives to flesh out the stories, his fingers flying across the laptop Claire had given him. One afternoon, Claire called Jamal into the kitchen. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "David's starting hospice soon," she said. "He doesn't have long." Jamal's heart sank, but he nodded, clutching his journal like a lifeline. "I'm going to finish the book," he promised. "For him." Claire pulled him into a hug, and for the first time, Jamal didn't pull away. He realized he wasn't just doing this for David, was doing it for the family he'd always wanted. The hospital smell sterile, sharp, unforgiving, clung to Jamal's clothes as he sat by David's bedside. The man who'd once towered over him now looked small, his frame swallowed by blankets, his breathing uneven. Yet David's eyes still sparkled when he saw Jamal's journal, pages now thick with their shared stories. "You're still writing?" David asked, his voice a rasp. Jamal nodded, flipping to a new chapter about a queer activist who'd fought for housing rights in the 70s. "This one's my favorite," he said, reading aloud. David listened, a faint smile tugging at his lips. And for a moment, the room felt less like a hospital and more like their living room in Rochester. Jamal spent every free moment at the hospital, balancing schoolwork and the book. Claire often joined them, her presence a quiet anchor. One day, as she adjusted David's pillow, she caught Jamal's eye. "You're giving him something to hold on to," she whispered. Jamal ducked his head, embarrassed but proud. He hadn't realized how much the project meant not just to David, but to him. But the weight of David's illness pressed harder each day. Jamal overheard the nurses talking about days, maybe weeks. The deadline loomed, and he threw himself into the book with a desperation he didn't fully understand. He wanted David to see it finished, to hold it in his hands. At night, alone in his room, he wrote until his fingers cramped. His journal now a mix of their stories and his own fears. What happens when he's gone? Will Claire still want me? One evening, as they worked, David reached for Jamal's hand. "I'm proud of you," he said, his grip weak but warm. "Not just for this book, but for who you are." The words hit Jamal like a wave, stirring something he'd buried deep. He wanted to tell David the truth about being gay, about the fear that kept him silent, but the moment passed, and he just squeezed David's hand back. The next day, Jamal made a decision. He couldn't keep hiding. If David and Claire were his family, they deserved to know him fully. He found Claire in the hospital cafeteria, stirring a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. "Can I tell you something?" he asked, his heart pounding. Claire nodded, her eyes gentle but tired. Jamal took a breath, the words tumbling out. "I'm gay. I've been scared to tell you because Because I didn't want you to send me away. The silence stretched, and Jamal braced himself. But then Claire reached across the table, her hand covering his. Jamal, we love you. All of you. That's never going to change. Her voice was fierce, and for the first time in years, Jamal felt a weight lift. He cried, and so did she, their hands clasped tight. When they told David later that day, he grinned, weak but genuine. Took you long enough. He teased, then coughed, his laughter fading into a wheeze. You're our son, Jamal. Always will be. The relief was overwhelming, but it came with a new urgency. Jamal worked faster, polishing the manuscript, formatting it on the laptop. He found a local printer willing to rush a single copy, a rough draft bound in simple black. When it arrived, he held it like a treasure, its weight both heavy and light in his hands. He brought it to the hospital, placing it in David's lap. We did it, he said, his voice thick. David's fingers trembled as he traced the title, Unsung Heroes, Stories That Shaped Us. You did it, David corrected, his eyes shining. You made it real. That night, Jamal wrote in his journal, they know me. They love me. And the book's done. But it's not enough. He wanted more, not just for David to see the book, but for the world to see it. An idea began to form. Risky and bold, but it felt right. He started researching online, reaching out to local bookstores, blogs, even a small press he found on a community forum. He didn't know if it would work, but he had to try. David's condition worsened, and the hospital room became their world. Jamal read chapters aloud, his voice steady even as his heart broke. Claire sat beside them, her hand on David's, her eyes on Jamal. They were a family, bound by love and loss. And Jamal knew he'd do anything to make David's final days matter. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on David's pale face. Jamal sat beside him, the manuscript open, reading a story about a trans teacher who'd fought for inclusive school policies in the 90s. David's breathing was shallow, but his eyes followed Jamal's every word, a lifeline in the haze of pain. Jamal had sent the manuscript to a small press in Buffalo, a long shot fueled by desperation. He hadn't told Claire or David yet, afraid to raise their hopes. But late at night, he'd check his email obsessively, his heart leaping at every notification. Most were rejections, polite, but firm. Still, he kept reaching out, driven by a need to make David's dream live beyond him. One morning, as Claire adjusted David's fore, Jamal noticed a new frailty in her movements. She was carrying too much David's illness. The house. Him. You don't have to do everything, he said, surprising himself. Claire looked at him, her eyes tired but grateful. I'm not alone anymore, she said. I have you. Her words stayed with him, fueling his resolve. At school, he started talking about the book, sharing snippets with his English teacher, Ms. Rivera, who'd always encouraged his writing. This is powerful, she said, reading a chapter. You should share it with the world. She connected him with a local librarian who hosted community readings. And Jamal, nervous but determined, agreed to present a chapter. The reading was held in a small bookstore, its shelves crammed with used paperbacks. About 20 people showed up, locals, classmates, even a few of David's former students. Jamal stood at the podium, his hands shaking as he read about a black gay couple who'd opened a community center in the 80s. His voice cracked at first, but as he spoke, he saw David's passion in the words, felt his own heart in them. The crowd listened, rapt, and when he finished, they clapped, some wiping tears. Afterward, A woman approached him, a reporter from a local paper. "This is special," she said. "Can I write about it?" Jamal hesitated, then nodded. He hadn't expected this, but it felt like a step toward something bigger. When he told David about the reading, the man's face lit up, a spark of the old David breaking through. "You're doing it," he whispered. "You're making them see." Claire hugged Jamal, her tears soaking his shoulder. For the first time, Jamal felt like he wasn't just a kid in their house, was their son, fighting for their shared dream. The article came out a week later, a small piece buried in the local section, but it mentioned the book and David's inspiration. Jamal brought the paper to the hospital, reading it aloud as David smiled weakly. "You're unstoppable," David said, his voice barely audible. But the next day, David slipped into a coma. The doctors said it was a matter of time. Jamal sat by his bed, the manuscript in his lap, reading even though he wasn't sure David could hear. Claire held David's hand, her face etched with grief but also pride as she watched Jamal. Late that night, Jamal got an email from the Buffalo Press. They wanted to publish the book, small run, local distribution, but real. His hands shook as he read the offer. He wanted to tell David, to see that spark in his eyes again. But David's chest rose and fell in silence. Jamal leaned close, whispering, "We did it, Dad." The word slipped out, raw and true, and tears burned his eyes. He hadn't meant to say it, but it felt right. Claire overheard, her breath catching, and she pulled Jamal into a hug. "He knows," she said. The next morning, David was gone. The hospital room felt impossibly empty, the manuscript still open on the chair. Jamal couldn't cry, not yet. He felt hollow, but also determined. The book wasn't just David's dream anymore. It was his, too. He and Claire planned a small memorial, but word of the book had spread. The local paper ran a follow-up, and the bookstore reading went viral on a small scale, shared across social media by people moved by the story of a dying teacher and his foster son. Jamal's inbox filled with messages, readers, activists, even a publisher in New York who wanted to talk. Jamal wrote in his journal, "He's gone, but the stories aren't. I'm going to keep going. For him. For us." The house felt like a shell without David's laughter, his corny jokes replaced by a silence that pressed against Jamal's chest. Claire moved through the rooms like a ghost, her eyes distant, her hands clutching David's old sweater. Jamal wanted to comfort her, but grief was a language he was still learning. He threw himself into the book's publication. The Buffalo Press sent edits, and Jamal worked late into the night, refining chapters, adding a dedication for David, who taught me family is a choice. He didn't know if he was ready for the world to read it, but he felt David's voice in every word, urging him forward. The viral post about the bookstore reading had caught more attention than he'd expected. A local TV station reached out, wanting to interview him and Claire. Jamal hesitated. Being in the spotlight felt exposing, especially as a black gay kid who'd spent years hiding. But Claire, her voice soft but firm, said, "David would want this. He'd want you to shine." The interview aired on a chilly October evening. Jamal sat on the couch with Claire, his hands sweaty as he watched himself on screen, talking about the book, David's dream, and their unlikely family. He'd mentioned being gay, his voice steady despite his nerves, and the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in support from strangers, stories from other foster kids, even a few harsh comments that stung but didn't break him. Claire squeezed his hand as they watched. "You're so brave," she said. Jamal shook his head. "I'm just doing what he taught me." But inside, he felt a shift. He wasn't just a kid anymore. He was someone with a voice, a purpose. The book, Unsung Heroes, hit local shelves a month later. The launch was held at the same bookstore, now packed with over 100 people, friends, neighbors, even a few activists who'd read about it online. Jamal stood at the podium, Claire beside him, and read the dedication aloud. His voice broke, but he kept going, feeling David's presence in the words. Afterward, people lined up to buy copies, some asking Jamal to sign them. A queer couple, both black, thanked him for telling stories like theirs. A teenager, shy and hesitant, said the book gave her hope. Jamal listened, his heart full, realizing the book was bigger than him. Bigger than David. It was a bridge to others who felt unseen. Claire, watching from the sidelines, wiped tears as she hugged him. He'd be so proud, she whispered. Jamal nodded, but the ache of David's absence was sharp. He missed the man who'd called him son, who'd believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. Back home, Jamal found a letter from the New York publisher. They wanted to expand the book's distribution, maybe even nationally. He showed it to Claire, who read it twice, her hands trembling. This is what he wanted, she said, for the stories to live. Jamal agreed to the deal, but he had conditions. He wanted the book to stay true to David's vision, raw, real, focused on the forgotten. The publisher agreed, and soon, Unsung Heroes was in bookstores across the Northeast. Reviews called it heartfelt and urgent, praising the voice of a teenager who'd turned grief into art. But success didn't erase the loss. Jamal and Claire leaned on each other, navigating their grief like sailors in a storm. They started a ritual every Sunday. They'd sit in the backyard, reading passages from the book, sharing memories of David. It hurt, but it healed, too. One night, Jamal found a new entry in his journal, written in Claire's handwriting, "You're my son, Jamal. Always." He stared at it, tears falling, and realized he wasn't just David's legacy, was Claire's family, too. He wrote back, "I'm staying. For you. For us." The book was spreading, but so was their bond. A quiet promise to keep going. As winter settled over Rochester, Jamal felt something he hadn't in years: home. Snow blanketed Rochester, softening the edges of the world. But Jamal felt the cold in his bones. The book's success was a whirlwind: interviews, signings, emails from readers across the country, but it couldn't fill the void David left. Claire tried to keep up, her smile bright for the cameras. But Jamal saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she lingered by David's old chair. He took on more, handling emails from the publisher, scheduling talks at libraries. At 17, he was still a kid, but he felt older, shaped by loss and love. The book was now in schools, used in history classes, and Jamal got letters from teachers saying it sparked conversations about identity, race, and resilience. One letter stood out. From a gay teen in Chicago, "Your book made me feel less alone." Jamal read it over and over, his heart swelling. He showed it to Claire, who teared up. "This is why we keep going," she said. They decided to donate a portion of the book's profits to a local LGBTQ+ youth center, a way to honor David's belief in lifting others up. But not everyone embraced the book. Online, trolls attacked Jamal, calling him names, questioning his right to tell these stories. Some comments cut deep, echoing the rejection he'd felt in foster homes. Claire noticed his silence one evening and sat him down. "You don't have to read that garbage," she said. "You're doing something real. They can't take that away." Her words steadied him, but the hate lingered. At a signing in Syracuse, a man heckled him, shouting that the book was pushing an agenda. Jamal froze, his old fears resurfacing. But then a woman in the crowd stood up, her voice sharp. "This kid's braver than you'll ever be," she said, and others clapped. drowning out the heckler. Jamal finished the signing, his hands shaking but his resolve stronger. Back home, he and Claire faced a new challenge, the foster system. Jamal's caseworker, Ms. Carter, called to discuss his future. He was nearing 18, and the system would soon cut him loose. Claire didn't hesitate. "We're adopting you," she said, her voice firm. "If you want it." Jamal's breath caught. Adoption was permanent, a word he'd never dared hope for. He nodded, tears spilling, and Claire pulled him into a hug. "You're my son," she said, echoing the note she'd left in his journal. The process began, paperwork piling up. But Jamal felt lighter, like he could finally exhale. The book's reach kept growing. A national talk show invited Jamal and Claire to share their story. Nervous but determined, they flew to Los Angeles, sitting under bright lights as the host asked about David, the book, and their family. Jamal spoke about being a black gay foster kid, his voice steady, and Claire talked about David's dream, her pride in Jamal shining through. The episode aired, and the response was overwhelming. Book sales spiked, and messages flooded in stories of loss, love, and found families. Jamal read them all, saving the best ones in his journal. One, from a foster parent, said, "You showed me what family can be." When they returned to Rochester, Jamal found a package at the door, a box of books, fresh from the printer, with a new cover featuring a photo of him, Claire, and David, taken in the backyard last summer. He traced David's face, the memory bittersweet. That night, he and Claire sat on the porch swing, the same one from their first days together. "We did it, Mom," he said, testing the word. Claire smiled, her hand on his. "We're just getting started," she said. Jamal wrote in his journal, "The world's listening. David's gone, but his love's still here. And so am I." Spring brought new life to Rochester, but Jamal felt David's absence in every bloom. The adoption papers were finalized, making him officially Jamal Thompson, a name that felt both foreign and right. Claire framed the certificate, hanging it beside David's old photos, a quiet promise of their forever. The book's success hadn't slowed. Unsung Heroes was now in libraries across the country, and Jamal was invited to speak at a national LGBTQ+ conference in Washington, D.C. He was terrified public speaking still made his stomach churn, but Claire's steady presence gave him courage. "You've got this," she said, squeezing his shoulder as they boarded the plane. At the conference, Jamal stood before a crowd of hundreds, sharing stories from the book and his own journey. He talked about David, about being a black gay kid in foster care, about finding family in unexpected places. The audience was silent, then erupted in applause. Some standing, others crying. A queer activist, an older black woman, approached him after. "You're changing lives," she said, handing him her card. "Let's talk about a foundation." The idea stunned him. A foundation. He was just a kid, barely 18. But the seed was planted. And on the flight home, he sketched ideas in his journal, a nonprofit to support foster kids, especially those who were LGBTQ+, with scholarships, mentorship, and safe spaces. Claire read over his shoulder, her eyes bright. "David would love this," she said. Back home, they started small. Jamal used book royalties to fund the first steps, partnering with the local youth center to offer writing workshops. He taught kids like him, kids who'd been told they didn't matter how to tell their stories. One girl, a quiet 15-year-old, wrote a poem about her trans identity that left Jamal speechless. He saw David in her courage, in her words. But the spotlight brought challenges. A conservative group targeted the book, calling for its ban in schools, claiming it was too political. Jamal saw the headlines, felt the sting of being reduced to a controversy. Claire, fierce as ever, helped him draft responses, emphasizing the book's truth and heart. "They can't silence you," she said. Support came from unexpected places. A viral video of Jamal's conference speech spread, shared by celebrities and activists. Donations poured into the youth center, and the foundation idea grew closer to reality. Jamal named it David's Legacy, a tribute to the man who'd seen him when no one else did. One evening, Claire found Jamal in the backyard, staring at the sunflowers they'd planted for David. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, but his voice was soft. "I miss him, and I'm scared I'm not doing enough." Claire sat beside him, her arm around his shoulders. "You're doing more than he ever dreamed. And you're not alone." Her words anchored him, a reminder that family wasn't just blood, it was love, chosen and fought for. Jamal kept speaking, writing, building. He started a blog, sharing updates about the foundation and stories from foster kids. The response was humbling: thousands of readers, hundreds of volunteers. He felt David's spirit in every step, guiding him. As summer approached, Jamal got an email from a major publisher. They wanted a sequel to Unsung Heroes, this time focused on youth voices. He hesitated, unsure if he could carry it alone. But Claire, reading the email, said, "You're not alone. You've got me, and you've got David in you." That night, Jamal wrote in his journal, "I'm scared, but I'm ready. This is for David, for Claire, for every kid like me." The foundation was taking shape. The book was changing lives. And Jamal, once a boy who packed light, was building something heavy with meaning. The sun hung low over Rochester, painting the backyard in hues of gold as Jamal stood before a small crowd. It was the launch of David's Legacy, the foundation now official, with a mission to empower LGBTQ+ foster youth. Claire stood beside him, her smile proud but tinged with the ache of David's absence. Jamal held a new edition of Unsung Heroes, its cover now featuring art by a foster teen from their workshops, a vibrant mural of diverse faces. He spoke to the crowd, local leaders, foster kids, supporters, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "This isn't just about a book," he said. "It's about family, about making sure no kid feels invisible." The applause was thunderous, but Jamal's eyes were on Claire, who wiped tears as she clapped. They'd done this together, turning grief into hope. The foundation had already funded scholarships for 3 kids, and their writing program was growing, with plans to expand nationally. After the event, a familiar face approached him as Carter, his old caseworker. "I always knew you were special," she said, hugging him. Jamal laughed, embarrassed but grateful. He'd come a long way from the boy who'd packed his life into a backpack, afraid to hope. That night, he and Claire sat on the porch swing, a tradition now. She handed him a letter David had written before he died, one she'd saved for the right moment. Jamal's hands trembled as he read, "Jamal, you're the son I never knew I needed. Keep telling the stories. Keep loving. You're my hero." Tears fell, but they were warm, not heavy. Jamal looked at Claire, his mom, and felt the weight of their journey: pain, love, resilience. "We're doing it, Mom," he said. She nodded, her hand in his. "And we'll keep doing it." The sequel to Unsung Heroes was underway, a collection of stories by foster youth, guided by Jamal's workshops. It was harder than the first, but he felt ready, fueled by the kids he mentored and the memory of David's belief in him. The foundation grew, too, with partnerships forming across the country. each step a testament to a family built not by blood but by choice. Online, the book and foundation sparked debates, but the support drowned out the hate. Jamal read messages from kids who'd found courage in his story, from parents who'd learned to listen. One, from a black gay teen in Atlanta, said, "You showed me I can be enough." Jamal kept writing, not just for the book, but for himself. His journal, once a place of fear, was now a record of hope. Its pages filled with plans for the foundation, dreams for the future, and love for his family. He was no longer the boy who expected rejection. He was Jamal. Rain pounded the foster home's roof, echoing the storm in Jamal's heart. At 16, he'd learned to expect rejection, his identity as a black gay teen a secret he guarded fiercely. Tonight, clutching his tattered journal, he braced for another temporary home. Ms. Carter, his caseworker, led him to a modest Rochester house where Claire and David Thompson, a white couple in their 40s, welcomed him with nervous warmth. Claire's kind eyes and David's awkward chuckle disarmed him. But Jamal stayed cautious. His journal, his only confidant. Is this a trick? The Thompsons surprised him. Claire played his favorite music. David invited him to trivia nights, and they gave him a room with a can of blue paint to make it his own. Slowly, Jamal's walls crumbled. But one night, he overheard Claire on the phone. The doctor said it's spreading. David had stage 4 cancer. Determined to help, Jamal learned David dreamed of writing a book about unsung heroes, ordinary people who changed history. "Let's do it together," Jamal offered, pouring his heart into their shared project. They wrote about forgotten activists, their bond deepening. Jamal hesitated to reveal he was gay, fearing rejection. But when he finally told Claire, she hugged him fiercely. "We love you. Always." David, weak but smiling, agreed, "You're our son." As David's health faded, Jamal raced to finish Unsung Heroes. He read chapters aloud in the hospital, David's eyes shining with pride. When a small press agreed to publish it, Jamal whispered to David, now in a coma, "We did it, Dad." David passed the next day. The book gained traction after a viral bookstore reading. Jamal and Claire faced grief together, their bond unbreakable. Unsung Heroes reached schools, libraries, and inspired a foundation for LGBTQ plus foster youth. Despite online hate, Jamal's voice grew stronger, fueled by David's belief in him. At the foundation's launch, Jamal read from the book, Claire by his side. A letter from David, found later, read, "You're my hero, Jamal." Tears fell as he realized he'd given David's dream life and found a family. His journal's final entry read, "I'm home." For David. For us.